We're joined live now by one of the key people advising the government on how to deal with the outbreak, their Chief Scientific Advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance. Good morning to you, Sir Patrick. I'd imagine it's been a very busy few days for you, a morning. Lots of people reacting to the press conference that you held yesterday and also asking whether we should be doing more. Our health editor, Dr. Hilary Jones, saying to us this morning that he thinks it's time to reconsider the advice on public gatherings. Is that something that you'll be looking at?
Well, the first thing to say is we've been working on this since the beginning of January, so that there's been a lot of scientists working on this, mathematical modelers, epidemiologists, virologists, clinicians, and the advice we've got is trying to lay out a path so we do the right thing at the right time, and there are more things to come, obviously. One of the reasons that we've done what we did yesterday is that's one of the impacts you can have, which is the biggest. So if you ask people with mild symptoms, either a cough, new persistent cough, or a temperature of 37.8 or above, to stay at home for a week, that is very effective in terms of reducing some of the speed of transmission. If you go to the other measures that have been proposed, which will come along, including potentially households having to do the same for 14 days if one person gets ill, and then protecting the very elderly and vulnerable during the period of peak transmission, so when the peak's actually occurring, those are the things which are the most impactful. And when you put mass gatherings against that, it's much less impactful as a way of stopping transmission. So is it something that should be considered? Yes, and we've looked at it and we'll continue to look at it. Is it the most important thing you can do? Far from it. There are other things that we need to get on top of, and they're quite disruptive things that we've already suggested doing. Those are the things we need to concentrate on to really get on top of this.
We're led to believe that we're something like maybe potentially 3-4 weeks behind where Italy is right now. We know that the Italians did that quite early on with their football particularly, and they're now much stricter in terms of their lockdown. We know it's happening all over the world. People are now banning these public gatherings, particularly at sporting events. If we're going to do it at some point, why not do it sooner rather than later, and then just keep it going to ensure that, as you say, the peak time is covered by that ban?
Well, I'll come back to the point that the most important things we can do are the things that make the biggest difference, and that's where we need to put our effort to make sure that those are the things that really get on top of it. And, my job is to make sure that the science advice from the groups of academics and others working on this is properly presented to government, and then obviously ministers need to decide which actions they wish to take. But you're much more likely to catch this from a friend, somebody close to you, somebody you're with, a relative, somebody nearby in a closed environment than at a big open gathering. And so when we think about changes to gatherings, it's really not as simple as just saying get rid of the very big ones. You need to think, what do you want to try and achieve in terms of so-called social distancing, which would extend beyond just thinking about very big gatherings.
So you're worried that people might just gather somewhere else because that's the nature of people. The problem is, Patrick Vallance, is you're obviously focused on this. You're obviously very well respected. But then there are other scientists saying something different. So it's very difficult for us to know exactly what to believe as ordinary people who aren't qualified and haven't done the modelling that you've done, what to believe and what to do. And when you look at what other countries have done and the apparent effects of that, for instance, South Korea has been praised for taking stronger action earlier on, hasn't it? And the results that they've got is very good. It makes it very hard for us to have trust. And on the programme, only this morning, Professor John Ashton has said that he believes people like you are being used as a screen, that Boris Johnson is being cowardly by constantly saying, I'm being led by the science. In other words, saying, it's these guys that have told me to do it this way. And actually, people aren't going to forgive you, or indeed him, if we lose the scale of people that we love dearly, as he put it, because of a failure to take action.
Well, I mean, John has often got lots of strong opinions on these things, and I respect them, and it's important to hear all of the diverse opinions on this. It's also important to recognise that my job is very simple, and that's to speak scientific truth to power. And I'm going to do that at all times. I'm going to make sure that the science advice that we've got from many, many respected scientists is properly put forward, and that's clear. And I think the government has actually listened very carefully to the advice that's coming forward. And in many ways, in terms of trying to make sure that we do this in the right way, we get ahead of it, we lay out the path, which is what we're doing, and we take the right actions at the right time. That is much better.
Why is your science different then from the science that Ireland is getting and the science that other countries are getting? Why is it different? Because that's what we don't understand. Everybody presumably is speaking truth to power, or certainly should be, and everybody is qualified scientists. So why is it different for us? Perhaps you could explain that for people.
I don't think the science advice is different, actually. I think the science advice, so for example, if you take the thing of mass gatherings, I don't think people would disagree with the position around the relative importance of mass gatherings versus other decisions you could make. That's different from saying I want to take a decision to ban them, and it's obviously quite a relatively actually easy thing to do that. Much more difficult to do the sorts of things we're talking about now, which are much more impactful, and that's what we need to concentrate on getting done. You want to make sure the most important things get done properly and done quickly. Doesn't mean that the other things can't be done as well at some point, and certainly those are all under review the whole time, and the evidence will change as the epidemic progresses.
One of the things that isn't going to change, and it's only going to get worse, it's certainly not going to get better, is the pressure on the NHS. And we've heard from every medical expert we've had in today that the extraordinary pressure the NHS is under. Are you concerned about the lack of resources in our NHS hospitals?
I'm absolutely concerned that with a big peak over a short period, any healthcare system in the world can be swamped by this, and that's very clear.
Enough resources are being given to the NHS to cope with this?
I think the NHS is working round the clock to make sure that they're focusing on the really important things, which are the respiratory support, so the ventilator beds, the ability to give intensive care unit support, and that's really where the focus is, because it's that part of the system that's going to come.
Have they got enough resources in your point of view, from your perspective?
Well, I think that's an NHS question. I know that they're looking very hard to make sure they get it there. So we're doing a twin track thing. They're looking to make sure they've got the right resources. We're trying to make sure that the advice that's given flattens the peak and broadens it so that you don't end up with too much demand at any one time. And that's really the mitigation phase of this. Make sure you've got the right resources there to deal with it, and make sure the demand for it is as low as it can be and spread out across the period. And that's the approach we're taking.